comment on a couple of things. And I want to mention a couple of things. One is for a multiple pathways of recovery conference. Most of the work on multiple recovery pathways, people think of pathways into recovery. And I want to add for a moment the idea of multiple pathways across stages of recovery. With me? So does everybody have something to write on? I want to give you a very short list, just to take a glance at it, just very quickly. There are a lot of stage of recovery models that have been developed over the years, and I'm going to give you for me, the simplest one to think about the design of recovery support services. So stage one is pre-recovery, not recovery, pre-recovery, okay? Number two is recovery, initiation, and stabilization. Number three is transition to recovery maintenance. Number four is an enhanced quality of personal and family life in long-term recovery. With me? Okay, the last one was enhanced quality of personal and family life in long-term recovery. And finally, efforts to break intergenerational cycles of addiction and related problems. Efforts to break intergenerational cycles of addiction and related problems. In my world, that's the simplest long-term framework when I think about stages of recovery over time. Now I want to ask you a question. Look at those 5 stages, and if you think of all the money this country has invested in clinical efforts to intervene in terms of treatment and support services, tell me where the majority of the money's at across those stages. Recovery, initiation, and stabilization. We know a lot about how to do that. We actually do that pretty well. The problem is we don't reach people early enough, because by the time people get into treatment, they have long, complex addiction careers, which means when we enter recovery, how much baggage are we bringing with us? You know, we're talking about 18, 20, 30-year addiction careers before the first treatment admission, and sometimes more years before the first year of sustained recovery. Okay? So we've got this massive investment in one stage. Now, if, as recovery support services become increasingly popular, the systems that fund those are going to tend to think of those as appendages to primary treatment in the United States. Agree?
Yeah.
So what I want to say as a closing thought is, if all we become is a loosely attached appendage to primary treatment, the entire recovery support movement will have failed.
Wow.
Because what do we need to do across those stages?
Continuum.
We need to have a continuum of recovery support services across all those categories. Now we're doing pretty thick. Let's do a quick pulse check. Pre-recovery, hey, we're out there now, right? We're out there, we're in the jails, we're in the emergency rooms, we're getting there. We're doing street outreach. And what we're figuring out with research is we can send recovery carriers into the most dope-infested, depressed environments, like jail cells, right? And somehow, through that exposure, ignites people's interest in recovery, who recover in spite of themselves, right? Not because of themselves. They get caught up in it in the same way they got caught up in the beginnings of their addiction career. They didn't choose their way into recovery. They got hooked up, right?
They did.
They got hooked up with. They got caught up in something. They were even hustling their way into recovery to get out of something else and recover in spite of themselves, right? So we're getting that pre-recovery done pretty good. We're beginning to get integrated into primary health care and primary treatment. That's great. They're wanting us to begin to extend the effects of treatment by post-treatment continuing support services and recovery checkup. That's fabulous. How long are we doing that?
Not long.
6 weeks? 6 months? A year is a long time, right? So my question is, when does recovery become stable? Think long-term. 5 years.
Yeah. 50%.
All the data we have, and the scientific community says of 4 to 5 years of continued stable recovery, your risk of ever experiencing recurrence again drops to the risk in the general population. By the way, the same thing is true for cancer. So how aggressively do we follow people with cancer for 5 years?
Very.
Very, right? As Phil and I have experienced, right? So how assertively are we following people following primary treatment for addiction? So we got to begin to push the window in terms of time. Now, what about the last 2 stages on here? Enhanced quality of personal family life and long-term recovery. Treatment centers ain't got a clue. They're not even in that world.
Right.
Their people are long gone before becomes an issue. Agree?
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing they're interested in is readmitting and get another 40 or 50 grand, right?
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm really suggesting is at this point in time, I think the responsibility comes to the recovery community to take that torch, if you will. And I think we're going to have the bulk of responsibilities for not only the transition to recovery maintenance, but all the work around enhanced quality of personal and family life and long-term recovery. And then I get to that stage where I've got these incredible blessings that have come into my life. And all of a sudden, these science people are telling me that my children have 4 to 5 times the risk of developing addiction simply because they're my son or daughter.
Yeah.
And so I asked the scientist, well, does my recovery status do anything to lower their risk?
It does.
And you know what they say? We don't have a clue.
Exactly.
We don't have a clue.
Yeah. Not a shred.
How many of us in recovery have been so blessed only to suddenly confront the addiction in our own children or grandchildren or on and on, right? So, I mean, if there's a frontier issue for us around recovery support services, how do we begin to work with not only individuals but with families and begin to take the best technologies we can muster to break these intergenerational cycles? Now, is it possible that styles and pathways of recovery would change radically across these?
Yeah.
Could I initiate recovery through AA, but discover that lacking a belief in God, I'm really beginning to struggle more and more within this framework? But I will forever be blessed with that framework in terms of the stability of my recovery initiation. But suddenly, I discover life-free secular recovery or a smart recovery meeting. And might I transition, or God forbid, attend my home group of AA on Monday and hit my smart recovery meeting on Thursday. We call it dual citizenship and recovery, by the way. Now, my point is, could I initiate recovery within one framework, and God forbid, disengage from active participation in that framework, but sustain my recovery in a completely different support framework? Because the assumption is, if I'm not in the rooms anymore, I'm dead, drunk, or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the reality is what? When we do community surveys, we find a whole lot of people that initiated recovery in the rooms, got the blessings of their recovery stability, and then migrated to churches and families and therapists and all kinds of other things out there to support long-term recovery. Different strokes for different folks. And part of multiple pathways to recovery is not only multiple pathways into recovery, multiple pathways across recovery. One other twist.
Across.
What about multiple variations in recovery styles across the life cycle?
Yeah.
What do we do with the end stage of recovery? What's the end stage? How do you die in recovery?
Yeah.
Huh? No, I'm sick.
That's a great question.
My question is, we have this growing population of aging people in recovery, right? Who've lived wonderful, blessed lives in recovery. And the question is, how do you end a life in recovery? Not how do you begin a life in recovery? And those are the kind of life stage kind of things. What about the difference between the developmental needs for peer recovery support for a 20-year-old versus a 13-year-old versus a 25-year-old versus a 53 versus a 93, right? And my point is, maybe we need an elder center of recovery. I'm starting to look around for I wanted assisted living facility for people in recovery. Right? Okay, enough on stage to recovery, but I left that out yesterday, and I really felt like I needed to leave that on the table. Very quickly, one of the questions that people have asked on, and you guys have been doing this a long time, and we've seen a lot of casualties in the process, right, around us, people that came in to help others that didn't make it on our journey. So I always get the question, how have you done this so long? How did you kind of keep the faith, you know? How did you kind of sustain your health? Because some of this is hard, right? I mean, if you truly promote multiple pathways of recovery, there are days you will get hate mail from both ends of the continuum on the same day.
Yeah.
You can imagine with my writings on medication-assisted treatment.
Yeah.
I get my ass kicked from the 12-step community, and these methadone and buprenorphine programs are telling me my demands are far too excessive for them to ever be able to meet in their lifetimes.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you doing? I want to give you 4 things. This is it. How do you survive in the insanity of this unique, blessed work we've been able to do? One is what I call centering rituals.
Yep.
These are daily, every day. And that is we find alone time where we can be quiet and meditate or pray or whatever you want to call it. But the most important thing is we get ourselves recentered on what's most important to us. Number 2 is mirroring rituals. And that's where we got to find kindred spirits. If you do this work alone, you will be sucked dry. And there will be nothing but a shell left. We got to find kindred spirits to renew us and fire us up. One of the things that I do, Don and I meet annually, at least.
Yeah.
And that's one of my most powerful mirroring rituals. Is my contact with Don over that time, and many other gatherings that I have like that. Number 3 are, we got mirroring rituals, acts of self-care, and acts of responsibility. Acts of self-care is taking care of self, right? Doing that self-maintenance stuff that many of us are not particularly good at. But also a bigger circle, not only myself, meaning me, but also that intimate circle that's most importantly around me. One must be careful in carrying light to the community, to not leave one's own home in darkness. Are you with me? What I mean about the intimate circle? That we're so busy giving to everybody else that by the time we get home, we got nothing left for the people we proclaim love to in terms of our spouses, partners, children. The final one is unpaid acts of service. Sounds like codependent hell, I know. Right?
I know.
The people in service roles, what they do to refresh themselves would be unpaid acts of service. What's the key? Why on earth would somebody refresh themselves doing service work outside of service roles? So I asked these who survive, what do you do when you're away from work? Oh, I coach volleyball, I do this, I volunteer for my church, I help with Meals on Wheels every once in a while. And I'm looking at them thinking, man, somebody's going to throw a net over you and carry you off to Minnesota for codependency treatment. So you ask, why do you do that? What do they tell you? Because it reminds me of why I got into this business to begin with. That's why it must be unpaid acts of service, right? 4 things, that's the key. If you want to survive, that's my recommendation for you. Do those 4 as often as you can. Last final thing, very quickly. Don and I, for 10 years, have been obsessed with, along with a number of other people of our generation within the advocacy movement, how do we take what we've been blessed with by our elders in the generation that came before us, and how do we pass this on to other people? So I hope part of what you got in these days, these 3 days, is a sense of a torch passing from us. We're pretty old. We're not going to be around too much longer, I don't think. We're going to keep at it as long as we can. We're still kind of the Energizer bunnies, but it's just we have a lot less energy than we used to have. So the question gets to be, how do we, I guess the way I can put it is there's a point in recovery where you wake up and you say, okay, I'm in recovery, now what the hell do I do, right? And most of us figured out that there's a higher purpose in recovery that becomes absolutely crucial to quality of life in recovery. And I think the most important of those higher purposes are something we can't achieve in our own lifetime. We will not be able to achieve the long-term visions of this recovery advocacy movement within our lifetime. That's big, right? I mean, that's big movement stuff. So the question gets to be, it's a relay race, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I recognize it's not only a marathon for each of us, but it's a marathon, it's a relay race. So the question for Don and I and others becomes, at our age, how do we begin to pass the torch? And I'm going to suggest that each of you are going to find yourselves in a way of needing to need mentors, to learn to mentor, and then to find ways to develop new people who are going to lead this continuation of this movement.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope, I don't use the torch metaphor, I use the feather metaphor out from Don. And that's that we carry this and then we have a way to pass it on. So I hope you feel a kind of torch passing to you, but I'm also ending it with a challenge. And that's that you must find ways to replicate your own leadership within your communities. If not, we will have a 100-yard dash of recovery advocacy and the whole movement will die of old age, in spite of all the things that we'll have achieved. So I challenge you to not only mentor yourselves, learn how to mentor other people, find those people who you will inspire and teach and develop, and then sit back like me and let them go create a world beyond anything you could have imagined. Because that's what you all have done for me. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nothing else to say except that recovery is contagious. Go out and infect someone. Live long and prosper. Safe travels, everybody. Love you all. Thank you very much.
How cool is that?